Ma'am, step out of the vehicle. Now. The red and blue lights painted the asphalt in restless pulses, reflecting off the polished surface of a black sedan parked just off Route 17, about 20 miles outside the city. The night air was cool, drifting in through the cracked window, carrying the faint smell of wet pavement and gasoline. Maya Henderson sat still for a second longer than expected, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, her breathing slow, measured, like she had learned to control it years ago in rooms where one wrong word could cost everything. The officer standing beside her window shifted his weight, one hand resting near his belt, the other tapping twice against the glass, not aggressive, but firm enough to signal authority. I said step out of the vehicle. His name tag read Whitaker. Ryan Whitaker. His voice carried that practiced edge, the kind that didn't need to be loud to make people comply. Maya turned her head slightly, her eyes catching the flicker of the patrol car's lights in the side mirror. Another cruiser had pulled up behind the first, its engine idling low, headlights cutting long shadows across the empty roadside. Somewhere in the distance, a truck passed, its rumble fading quickly into the dark. She reached for the door handle and stepped out slowly, the gravel beneath her shoes crunching softly as she straightened to her full height. About 5'8", composed, dressed in a simple navy blouse and dark slacks. Nothing flashy, nothing that announced status. Just another woman pulled over on a quiet highway. Ryan took a quick glance at her, then at the car, then back at her again, like he was fitting pieces together that didn't quite match. License and registration, he said, extending his hand. Maya didn't rush. She reached into her bag, pulled out her wallet, and handed over her license with a calm that felt almost out of place in the tension hanging between them. Ryan scanned it briefly, his brow tightening just a fraction, then looked back up at her. This your vehicle? The question hung there, simple on the surface, but weighted underneath. Maya met his gaze without flinching. Yes, officer. It is. Behind Ryan, one of the other officers let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a chuckle, quickly masked by the static crackle of a radio. Step. Over here, Ryan said, gesturing toward the front of the car. The hood was still warm from the drive, heat rising faintly into the night air. Maya walked forward, each step steady, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. A passing car slowed slightly, the driver's face illuminated for a split second as they glanced at the scene, then kept going. Ryan placed her license on the hood, flattening it with his palm as if anchoring the moment in place. We're getting reports of a vehicle matching this description involved in a situation about 10 miles back, he said, his tone shifting just enough to suggest suspicion without stating it outright. So we're going to need to sort a few things out. Maya glanced at the license, then back at him. Of course. Her voice was even, controlled, carrying no trace of irritation, no defensiveness. That seemed to unsettle him more than anything. He studied her again, longer this time, eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to read something beneath the surface. Mind telling me where you're coming from tonight? Work, she replied. Downtown. Another officer circled slowly behind her, not close enough to touch, but close enough to be felt, his boots scraping lightly against the gravel with each step. The air grew tighter, heavier, like the space itself was holding its breath. Ryan tapped the edge of her license again, then looked at the name. Maya Henderson. The name lingered in his mind for a second, though he couldn't place why. Not yet. He cleared his throat. You got any reason we should think this car doesn't belong to you? The question landed sharper this time. Maya didn't react the way most people would. No raised voice. No sudden movement. Just a slight tilt of her head, a quiet inhale, and then she said, softly, You might want to check that again. Ryan's jaw tightened just a fraction, the smallest crack in his controlled demeanor. Behind him, the radio buzzed again, a dispatcher's voice cutting through the static, but he didn't turn to listen. Not yet. His attention stayed locked on her, on the calm in her eyes, on the way she stood there like she wasn't the one being questioned, like she was waiting for something he hadn't realized yet. The lights kept flashing. The road stayed quiet. And somewhere in that silence, something had already begun to shift. Ryan did not move right away, but something in his posture shifted, subtle enough that most people would not notice it, except Maya did, because she had spent years reading rooms where power tried to hide behind routine, and she knew the exact moment when certainty began to crack, even if just a little. The radio on his shoulder crackled again, louder this time, a voice cutting through the static with clipped urgency. But he still did not respond, his attention locked on her, as if the answer he wanted was written somewhere on her face, and he just had not found it yet. "What exactly am I supposed to check again?" he asked, his tone controlled, but no longer as smooth as before. Maya did not raise her voice, did not step back, did not do anything that would escalate the situation. She simply let the silence sit between them for a beat longer than comfortable, then nodded slightly toward the license resting under his hand. "Start with the name," she said. Behind them, the second officer shifted his stance, boots scraping lightly against the gravel, his gaze moving from Maya to Ryan and back again, uncertainty creeping in where there had been quiet confidence just moments before. The night felt different now, heavier, like the air itself had thickened. Ryan glanced down at the license again, slower this time, actually reading it instead of scanning it. Maya Henderson. The address. The expiration date. Nothing out of place. Nothing that explained the calm standing in front of him. He exhaled through his nose and looked back up. "You think this is funny?" he asked. Maya's expression did not change. "No, officer. I think this is important." The words landed softly, but they carried weight, the kind that did not need volume to be felt. Another burst of static came through the radio, sharper now, followed by the dispatcher's voice, clearer than before. "Unit 12, confirm your location." "Unit 12, do you copy?" Ryan hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, then reached up and pressed the button on his shoulder. "Unit 12, we are on Route 17, about 20 miles north of the city. Conducting a traffic stop." There was a brief pause, then the dispatcher again, her tone shifting slightly. "Copy that. Be advised, command update just came through. New captain assignment effective immediately. All units are to remain alert for official confirmation." Ryan frowned, the words not quite connecting yet, like pieces of a puzzle laid out, but not assembled. "Received," he said, releasing the button. Maya watched him carefully, not with defiance, not with fear, but with a quiet patience that felt almost out of place under flashing lights and tension. One of the officers behind her leaned in slightly toward Ryan, lowering his voice just enough to be private, but not enough to disappear. "You hear that?" he murmured. Ryan gave a small nod, his eyes still on Maya. "Yeah, I heard it." He looked back down at the license one more time, then at her again, longer this time, really looking, as if something about her presence refused to fit into the version of events he had already decided was true. "Where exactly do you work downtown?" he asked. "Precinct headquarters," Maya replied, her voice steady, her words simple, but placed with precision. The second officer let out a quiet breath, not quite a laugh this time, more like uncertainty trying to mask itself. "That's so," he said under his breath. Maya did not respond to him. She kept her focus on Ryan, because she knew he was the one making decisions, the one holding the line between what this moment was and what it could become. A car passed again, slower this time, the driver's head turning more noticeably before disappearing into the dark. The flashing lights reflected off the passing windows like fragments of something unresolved. Ryan straightened slightly, the shift almost imperceptible, but enough to signal that the balance was no longer entirely in his favor. "Do you have any identification besides this?" he asked. Maya reached into her bag again, her movements deliberate, unhurried, and pulled out a second card, holding it between her fingers for a moment before handing it over. Ryan took it, his thumb brushing across the surface as he looked down. The badge caught the light differently than the license had, reflecting a sharper glint under the red and blue pulses. For a brief second, his expression did not change. Then something flickered, small, fast, almost gone before it could fully form. The officer behind Maya leaned in closer, trying to see, his earlier confidence now replaced with curiosity edged in caution. The radio buzzed again, louder, insistent this time, like it refused to be ignored any longer. "Unit 12, confirm status." "Repeat, confirm status." Ryan did not answer right away. His eyes moved from the badge in his hand to Maya's face, then back again, like he was measuring something he had not expected to measure tonight. Maya stood still, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing even, the faint sound of wind brushing past the roadside grass filling the space where words had paused. "Go ahead," she said quietly, not as a command, not as a challenge, but as a simple invitation to look closer. And in that moment, under the flashing lights and the weight of his own assumptions, Ryan Whitaker realized that whatever this stop was supposed to be, it was no longer that anymore. The badge felt heavier in Ryan Whitaker's hand than it should have, a thin piece of metal and enamel catching the patrol lights and throwing them back in sharp flashes that seemed too bright for something so small. He did not speak right away. The radio continued to crackle at his shoulder, the dispatcher repeating the call, but the sound had started to blur into the background, like his mind was choosing what mattered and what did not. He looked down again, this time slower, reading every line, every engraved letter, not skimming, not assuming. Maya Henderson, police captain. The words did not shout. They did not need to. They simply existed, quiet and undeniable. Behind him, the second officer shifted closer, curiosity pulling him in despite the tension that now filled the space. "What does it say?" he asked, low, careful, like he was already sensing that the answer might change something he could not undo. Ryan did not answer him. Not yet. His jaw tightened slightly, the kind of movement that came when someone realized they had stepped into a situation they no longer fully controlled. He lifted his eyes back to Maya. She had not moved. Not a single unnecessary motion. Her hands rested loosely at her sides, her shoulders relaxed, her gaze steady, not confrontational, not submissive, just present. The flashing lights painted her face in alternating colors, red then blue then red again. But her expression did not shift with them. "You said you work at headquarters," Ryan said, his voice lower now, more measured than before, like he was choosing each word instead of letting them come automatically. "Yes," Maya replied. The wind moved lightly across the roadside, brushing the tall grass beyond the shoulder, carrying with it the faint hum of distant traffic. It was a normal night. It was supposed to be a routine stop, and yet nothing about it felt routine anymore. The radio cut through again, sharper this time, the dispatcher's tone no longer just procedural. "Unit 12, confirm status immediately. Command is requesting update." Ryan exhaled slowly and reached up, pressing the button on his shoulder without taking his eyes off Maya. "Unit 12, stand by," he said, his voice steady, but missing the earlier edge. He released the button, and for a moment, no one spoke. The second officer leaned in a fraction more, his eyes finally catching a glimpse of the badge in Ryan's hand. The reaction was immediate, though quiet. His posture shifted. His shoulders pulled back slightly, like instinct had stepped in before thought could catch up. "Wait," he said under his breath. "Is that?" He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Ryan swallowed once, subtle, almost invisible, but enough to break the rhythm of control he had held since the beginning of the stop. He looked back down at the badge one more time, as if hoping it might say something different if he checked again. It did not. The same name, the same title, the same quiet certainty. He turned it slightly in his hand, watching the light slide across its surface, then finally spoke, though the words came slower than before. "Why didn't you say this earlier?" Maya's answer came without hesitation. "I did," she said. Not louder, not sharper, just clear. The truth of it settled into the space between them, not as an accusation, but as something heavier. Something that could not be undone by tone or explanation. The second officer stepped back half a pace, his boots scraping against the gravel, the sound louder now in the silence that followed. Another car passed in the distance, its headlights sweeping briefly across the scene before disappearing into the dark. The world outside continued exactly as it had before. But here, on this stretch of road, everything had shifted. Ryan looked at her again, really looked this time, not at her clothes, not at the car, not at the assumptions he had made when the lights first came on, but at her. The calm, the control, the quiet authority that had been there from the beginning, whether he recognized it or not. The radio buzzed again, insistent, pulling at the moment. "Unit 12, respond." He hesitated, then pressed the button. "Unit 12, he said, his voice different now, steadier in a new way, like it had adjusted to something he had not expected. "Stand by. Situation is being clarified." He released the button and let his hand fall back to his side, the badge still in his other hand, no longer just an object, but a line he had already crossed without knowing it. Maya took a slow breath, barely visible, the rise and fall of her chest subtle under the shifting light. She did not step forward. She did not demand anything. She simply waited. And that, more than anything else, made the weight of the moment impossible to ignore. The silence did not break all at once. It stretched, thin and tight, like something pulled too far, but not yet snapped. And Ryan Whitaker felt it before he understood it. The shift from control to awareness settling into his chest in a way that made every small movement suddenly feel louder than it should have been. The faint hum of the cruiser engine, the soft tick of cooling metal from Maya's car, the distant sound of tires rolling across asphalt somewhere far behind them, all of it pressing into the moment as if reminding him that nothing about this could be undone by simply stepping back. He looked at the badge again, then finally extended it toward her, not abruptly, not casually, but carefully, like the weight of it had changed in his hand, and he no longer wanted to be the one holding it without understanding what it meant. Maya took it without hurry, her fingers steady, her touch light, and for a brief second their hands almost met under the flashing lights before separating again, the distance between them now carrying something entirely different than before. Ryan cleared his throat, a small sound, but enough to signal that he was about to speak, though the words did not come as easily as they had earlier. "Captain," he started, then paused, the title unfamiliar in his mouth in this context, like it belonged somewhere else, somewhere structured and formal, not on the side of a dark highway under pulsing lights. He adjusted slightly, straightening his posture, his shoulders pulling back instinctively, the habits of training rising to meet the reality he could no longer ignore. "Captain Henderson," he said again, this time more clearly. Behind him, the second officer took another half-step back, creating space without being told, his earlier stance of casual authority replaced with something closer to uncertainty, even respect, though he did not fully know how to express it yet. The radio buzzed again, but Ryan did not reach for it immediately. His attention stayed on Maya, because now the conversation mattered more than the protocol he had followed without thinking just minutes ago. "We received a report," he said, slower now, choosing his words with care, "and the vehicle description matched." "I did not." He stopped, the sentence unfinished, not because he could not explain it, but because the explanation no longer felt sufficient. Maya watched him, her expression unchanged, but her eyes sharper now, not with anger, but with clarity. "You did what you thought was right," she said quietly. The statement was simple, but it carried layers, not absolving, not accusing, just acknowledging. Ryan nodded once, the motion small, controlled. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, the formality settling in naturally now, replacing the edge that had been there before. The wind picked up slightly, brushing past them, tugging gently at the edges of Maya's blouse, carrying the scent of the road and something faintly metallic from the cruisers. The night felt cooler now, or maybe it was just that everything else had shifted enough to make him notice it. "Dispatch is asking for confirmation," Ryan added, gesturing slightly toward his shoulder radio, though he still had not responded. Maya glanced briefly at the radio, then back at him. "Then you should answer them," she said. There was no command in her tone, but there did not need to be. Ryan reached up and pressed the button. "Unit 12, he said, his voice steady, different now, aligned with the reality in front of him. "Status update. We have identified the individual. Situation is secure." There was a brief pause on the other end, then the dispatcher responded, her tone shifting subtly as she processed the information. "Copy that, Unit 12. Confirm identification." Ryan's eyes flicked once more to Maya, then back forward. "Confirmed," he said. "Captain Henderson is on scene." The words landed into the radio, into the night, into the space that had just hours ago been routine and now felt like something else entirely. Behind him, the second officer straightened fully, his posture now mirroring Ryan's, the informal looseness gone, replaced by something more structured, more aware. The passing traffic had thinned, the road stretching out in both directions with long, empty lines, illuminated only by the rotating lights and the steady glow of headlights fading into the distance. Ryan released the radio button and let his hand fall back to his side, then took a small step back, creating a respectful distance that had not existed before. "Is there anything you need from us, Captain?" he asked. The question was direct, but it carried something new, something that had not been there at the start of the stop. Maya looked at him for a moment, not rushing to answer, letting the silence sit just long enough to be felt, but not long enough to become uncomfortable. Then she shook her head slightly. "No," she said. "Just make sure the next stop starts with a question, not a conclusion." The words were calm, but they settled deeper than any raised voice could have. Ryan nodded again, slower this time, the meaning of it not lost on him. "Understood," he said. And in that quiet exchange, under the fading tension and the steady rhythm of the night, the line between authority and humanity had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to change everything that came after. For a moment, no one moved, as if the road itself had paused to absorb what had just happened, the flashing lights now slower in perception, less chaotic, more like a steady pulse than a warning, and Ryan Whitaker stood there with his hands at his sides, feeling the unfamiliar weight of a moment that had already passed but had not yet settled inside him, the kind that lingers long after the sound fades. Maya Henderson turned slightly toward her car, not abruptly, not dismissively, just a natural shift, like someone who had nothing left to prove and no need to stay longer than necessary, her hand brushing lightly against the side of the vehicle as she walked back toward the driver's door. The gravel crunched softly under her shoes again, the same sound as before, but it carried a different meaning now, not tension, not uncertainty, just movement. Ryan watched her for a second, then took a small step forward, not to stop her, but to speak before the moment closed completely. "Captain," he said, his voice steady but quieter than before, not because he lacked confidence, but because he understood something now about volume and respect. Maya paused with her hand resting on the door handle and looked back at him over her shoulder. The red and blue lights traced across her face again, softer now, less harsh. "Yes, officer," she replied. Ryan hesitated for just a fraction of a second, choosing his words carefully, not out of fear, but out of recognition that they mattered more now than they had earlier. "The report we received," he said, "it was incomplete. We should have verified before making assumptions." He did not rush the sentence. He did not try to cover it with authority. He let it stand as it was. Maya held his gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod, not approving, not dismissing, just acknowledging. "That happens," she said. "What matters is what you do after you realize it." The words settled between them, quiet but firm, like a line drawn without needing to be emphasized. Behind Ryan, the second officer shifted again, this time stepping fully back toward the cruiser, his posture now aligned with protocol instead of instinct, his earlier uncertainty replaced with a quiet awareness that he had just witnessed something he would remember longer than he expected. The radio remained silent for the moment, the dispatcher no longer pressing, the urgency replaced with a waiting stillness that matched the road around them. A breeze moved through again, cooler now, carrying the faint scent of distant rain even though the sky above remained clear. Ryan nodded once more, slower this time, the motion carrying more weight than before. "It will not happen the same way again," he said. Maya's expression softened just slightly, not into a smile, but into something warmer, something that recognized the effort behind the words. "Good," she said simply. She opened the car door then, the soft click of the handle and the low creak of the hinge sounding louder in the quiet night, and slid into the driver's seat with the same calm she had shown from the beginning. The interior light flickered on briefly, illuminating the dashboard, the steering wheel, the small details that had gone unnoticed earlier, then dimmed again as the door closed. Ryan stepped back, giving her space, his eyes following the movement not out of suspicion anymore, but out of a kind of respect that had not been there at the start of the stop. The second officer moved toward the cruiser, opening the passenger door and pausing for a second before getting in, glancing once more toward Maya's car as if trying to hold on to the moment just a little longer before it became memory. The engines hummed softly, steady and low, the kind of background sound that fades unless you are paying attention. Maya adjusted the rearview mirror slightly, her eyes catching the reflection of the patrol lights one last time, then shifted her gaze forward to the empty stretch of road ahead. Her hands rested on the steering wheel again, just as they had at the beginning, but everything else had changed. Ryan raised his hand briefly, a small gesture, not formal, not exaggerated, just enough to signal acknowledgement, and Maya responded with a slight nod of her own before turning the key. The engine came to life smoothly, the headlights stretching out ahead of her, illuminating the asphalt in a long, steady line. The patrol lights continued to flash behind her for a moment longer. Then Ryan reached back into the cruiser and switched them off, one by one, until the road returned to its natural darkness, broken only by the glow of headlights and the distant shimmer of passing traffic. Maya eased the car forward, the tires rolling over the gravel and back onto the pavement, the motion smooth and controlled. And as she accelerated gently down the road, the distance between her and the officers grew, not just in space, but in something deeper, something that had shifted quietly and would not return to what it had been before. Ryan stood there for a second longer, watching the taillights fade into the distance, the red glow growing smaller until it disappeared completely, leaving only the quiet road, the cooling engines, and the echo of a moment that had changed more than either of them had expected. The road stretched out ahead of Maya Henderson in a long, quiet line, the headlights cutting through the darkness in steady beams that revealed nothing but asphalt and the occasional reflective marker blinking back at her like distant signals. And inside the car, the silence felt different than before, not empty, not tense, but settled, like something unresolved had finally found its place without needing to be spoken out loud. Her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, her grip relaxed but precise, the kind that came from habit rather than effort, and her eyes stayed forward, focused, though the reflection in the rearview mirror lingered just long enough for her to watch the patrol cars shrink into nothing, their presence fading not just from sight, but from the moment itself. She exhaled slowly, the breath steady, controlled, the same way it had been when she stood under flashing lights minutes earlier, because control was not something she turned on and off, it was something she carried, something she had learned long before tonight. The dashboard clock read 9:42 p.m., the soft glow casting a faint light across the interior, and the radio inside her car remained off, the quiet allowing the rhythm of the drive to take over, the low hum of the engine, the faint vibration through the seat, the sound of tires rolling evenly over the road. Somewhere ahead, the city lights began to appear, distant at first, a soft orange haze against the horizon, then slowly sharper as she continued forward, mile by mile, the familiar path unfolding in front of her like something she had walked 100 times before. But tonight felt different, not because of what had happened, but because of what had been revealed in it. Back on the roadside, Ryan Whitaker remained standing for a moment longer than necessary, his hands resting on his belt, his posture still, but not rigid, the kind of stillness that came from thinking, not from control, and the silence around him felt louder now that the flashing lights were gone, the absence of them leaving the night exposed in a way that made everything clearer. The second officer closed the cruiser door with a soft thud and glanced over at Ryan, not speaking right away, as if waiting to see if he would say something first. Ryan did not turn immediately. His eyes stayed on the road where the car had disappeared, the faintest trace of red taillights already gone, leaving nothing but darkness and the quiet hum of the engine behind him. "You knew?" the second officer finally asked, his voice low, careful. Ryan shook his head once, slow and deliberate. "No," he said. The answer was simple, but it carried more than the word itself. It carried the realization behind it. He turned then, looking at the other officer, his expression not defensive, not dismissive, just honest in a way that did not need to be explained further. "I thought I did," he added after a second. The other officer nodded slightly, not because he fully understood, but because he felt the weight of it anyway. Ryan walked back toward the cruiser, each step measured, his boots pressing into the gravel with a soft crunch that echoed faintly in the quiet. He paused by the driver's door, his hand resting briefly on the handle before he looked down at the ground. The small details suddenly sharper than before, the scattered stones, the faint tire marks, the place where the moment had happened, now just another part of the road. He opened the door and slid into the seat, the familiar interior of the cruiser surrounding him, the radio mounted on the dash, the glow of the instrument panel, the steady idle of the engine. For a second, he did nothing. Then he reached for the radio. "Dispatch," he said, his voice even, composed, but different now, shaped by something that had shifted. "Unit 12, traffic stop complete." There was a pause, then the dispatcher responded, her tone returning to routine. "Copy that, Unit 12. Anything to report? Ryan glanced through the windshield, the road stretching out ahead, empty and quiet. Negative, he said. He released the button and leaned back slightly in the seat, his hands resting on the steering wheel, mirroring a posture he had seen just minutes earlier, though he did not realize it consciously. The second officer got into the passenger seat, closing the door softly, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The engine hummed, the dashboard lights glowed, and outside, the night continued exactly as it had before, unchanged and indifferent. But inside the cruiser, something had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. Ryan adjusted the rearview mirror, a small, automatic motion, but when he looked into it, he did not see flashing lights or tension or control. He saw a reflection of himself, still, quiet, and for the first time that night, he did not rush past it. He let it stay for a second, longer than usual, then turned his gaze forward and put the car into drive. The cruiser rolled back onto the road, merging smoothly into the empty lane, the tires humming against the asphalt as they picked up speed, and as the distance closed between where they were and where they were going, the moment they had just lived did not disappear. It followed, not as a mistake, not as a wait, but as something quieter, something that would change the next decision before it was even made. The city lights grew closer with every mile, stretching upward into the night like a quiet promise of structure after the open road, and Maya Henderson eased her car into the flow of late evening traffic, the rhythm shifting from long empty stretches to measured movement between lanes, brake lights flickering ahead in soft red patterns that reflected across her windshield. The transition was smooth, almost seamless, but inside the car, the silence remained, not heavy, not tense, just present, like a space she allowed herself to sit in before stepping fully back into the world waiting for her. She adjusted her grip on the steering wheel slightly as she approached the first major intersection, the traffic signal glowing red, holding a line of cars in place. She slowed to a stop, the tires rolling gently to a pause, and for a moment, everything aligned in stillness again, engines idling, streetlights humming faintly overhead, the soft buzz of electricity blending into the background. To her right, a driver glanced over briefly, then looked away. Nothing unusual, just another car, another person, another moment passing unnoticed. That was how most things were. Quiet, unseen, until they were not. The light changed, and the line moved forward, steady and controlled, and Maya continued toward downtown, the buildings rising higher now, glass and steel catching reflections from passing headlights, the city wrapping around her in familiar layers of sound and motion. She knew these streets, knew the turns, the signals, the places where traffic slowed and where it flowed freely. But tonight, there was something else beneath the familiarity, something quieter, something that had not been there before. Back in the cruiser, Ryan Whitaker guided the vehicle into the same stream of traffic several miles behind her, though he did not know it, his focus forward, his hands steady on the wheel, the earlier tension replaced. With a kind of awareness that stayed just beneath the surface, influencing each small decision without announcing itself. The radio remained quiet for a moment, then came alive again with routine calls, background noise that usually filled the space without requiring attention. But tonight, Ryan listened differently, not just for instructions, but for tone, for context, for the things that were not said as clearly as the things that were. The second officer shifted slightly in his seat, glancing over at Ryan before looking back out at the road. "You ever had that happen before?" he asked, his voice neutral, but carrying a hint of something more, curiosity, maybe, a reflection. Ryan did not answer immediately. He kept his eyes on the road, watching the traffic ahead, the spacing between cars, the small adjustments that kept everything moving smoothly. "No," he said finally. The word was simple, but it did not close the thought. "But I have had moments where I thought I knew what I was looking at," he added after a second. The second officer nodded slightly, not pushing further, not needing to. The city closed in around them, buildings rising on either side, streetlights closer together now, casting a steady glow over the lanes as they moved deeper into the grid of downtown streets. At a red light, Ryan's gaze drifted briefly to the rearview mirror again, not out of habit this time, but intention, and for a moment, he saw more than just the reflection of headlights behind him. He saw the space where assumptions had filled in answers too quickly, where questions had come second instead of first. The light turned green, and he moved forward again, the cruiser blending into traffic, just another vehicle in the flow. Up ahead, Maya turned onto a quieter street that led toward the precinct building, the structure rising at the end of the block, its windows lit in steady rows, a familiar anchor in the middle of the city. She slowed as she approached, the guard at the entrance glancing up as her car rolled toward the gate. He recognized the vehicle, or maybe just the presence behind it, and nodded, pressing the button to open the barrier without needing to ask. The gate lifted smoothly, and Maya drove through, the tires transitioning from street pavement to the smoother surface of the precinct lot. She parked in a marked space near the entrance, the engine idling for a moment before she turned the key and let it fall silent. For a second, she sat there, hands still on the wheel, eyes forward, the city noise muted inside the car. Then she reached for her bag, gathered her things, and stepped out, the door closing softly behind her. The air felt different here, quieter, contained, the sounds of the city filtered through distance and walls. She walked toward the entrance, her steps steady, her posture unchanged, but the night had already marked something in the path she had taken to get here. And miles away, moving through the same city under the same lights, Ryan Whitaker continued his patrol, the road unfolding ahead of him just as it always had. But the way he saw it now had shifted, not dramatically, not loudly, but enough to change what would happen the next time the lights came on. The glass doors of the precinct opened with a soft hydraulic hiss as Maya Henderson stepped inside, the temperature shifting immediately from the cool night air to the controlled stillness of the building, where the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant murmur of voices replaced the open silence of the road. And for a moment, the transition felt like crossing an invisible line between two worlds that operated on the same rules, but did not always see them the same way. The front desk officer looked up from his monitor, his posture straightening instinctively when he recognized her, not just her face, but the presence she carried, the quiet authority that did not need to announce itself. "Good evening, Captain," he said, his tone respectful, steady. Maya gave a small nod in return, not slowing her pace as she moved past the desk, her footsteps measured against the polished floor, each step echoing faintly in the open space. The hallway beyond was lit evenly, the walls lined with framed commendations, photographs, moments frozen in time that told stories without words. And as she walked, her reflection appeared briefly in the glass of each frame, then disappeared again, like a reminder that identity was often shaped by what others chose to see and what they chose to overlook. She reached the elevator and pressed the button, the soft chime signaling its arrival, and stepped inside alone, the door sliding closed with a quiet finality that sealed off the outside world for just a few seconds. The elevator rose smoothly, the numbers lighting up one by one, and in that brief ascent, the silence returned, not empty, but reflective, the kind that allowed a moment to settle without forcing it to be explained. When the doors opened, the upper floor carried a different energy, quieter, more focused, the kind of space where decisions were made and consequences followed, not always immediately, but inevitably. Maya stepped out and moved down the corridor, passing offices with lights still on, silhouettes shifting behind frosted glass, the late hours of work continuing as they always did. In her office, she placed her bag gently on the desk, the room still and orderly, the faint scent of paper and polished wood lingering in the air. She did not sit right away. Instead, she walked to the window, looking out over the city, the streets below stretching in lines of light and movement, each car a story, each stop a moment that could change depending on how it was approached. Miles away, Ryan Whitaker guided the cruiser through a quieter section of downtown, the traffic thinning as the hour moved later, the streets opening up in long stretches broken only by the occasional signal or passing vehicle. The earlier conversation with his partner had faded into silence, not because there was nothing left to say, but because some things required time more than words. The radio crackled again, dispatch assigning a routine call a few blocks ahead, and Ryan acknowledged it with a steady voice, his response clear, precise, but shaped now by something that had not been there before. As they approached the intersection, he slowed earlier than necessary, scanning the surroundings more carefully, not just looking, but observing, taking in details without rushing to conclusions, the subtle differences that might have been overlooked before now holding more weight. The cruiser rolled to a stop at a red light, and for a moment, everything aligned again in stillness, the engine idling, the soft glow of streetlights reflecting off the hood, the quiet pause before movement resumed. Ryan glanced briefly at the pedestrian crossing signal, then at the sidewalk, where a man stood waiting to cross, his posture relaxed, unaware of the scrutiny that often accompanied a passing patrol car. Ryan did not linger on him. He did not assign meaning where there was none. He simply observed, then looked forward again as the light turned green and the cruiser moved on. Back in her office, Maya turned from the window and finally took a seat, the chair settling beneath her with a soft shift, her hands resting lightly on the desk as she allowed the quiet to remain, not rushing to fill it with reports or calls or explanations. She did not need to write anything down to remember what had happened. Some moments did not require documentation to leave a mark. They simply existed, shaping the next decision before it was made. The city continued outside, unchanged in its rhythm, but within it, two paths had shifted slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice, not enough to make headlines or reports, but enough to alter the way a question would be asked, the way a moment would be approached, the way authority would be carried the next time it mattered. The clock on the wall above Maya Henderson's desk read 10:18 p.m., the second hand moving in steady, quiet ticks that seemed louder in the stillness of her office, and she sat there for a moment longer than necessary, not reading, not writing, just letting the weight of the night settle into something she could carry without it slowing her down. The city outside continued its motion, headlights tracing lines across the streets below, distant sirens rising and fading without urgency, just part of the rhythm that never fully stopped. She reached for a file on her desk, opening it slowly, the paper crisp under her fingers, but her eyes did not move across the page right away. Instead, her attention drifted, not backward in a way that lingered, but just enough to acknowledge the moment that had already passed. On the road, Ryan Whitaker guided the cruiser into a narrower street lined with parked cars and dim storefronts, the kind of place where details mattered more because everything was closer, tighter, easier to misread if you were not paying attention. The call from dispatch had been routine, a noise complaint, nothing urgent, nothing that required force, but as he slowed the cruiser near the address, his approach was different now, not just an action, but an intention. He parked a few yards away instead of directly in front, giving himself space to observe before stepping in, the engine idling low as he scanned the area, the windows of nearby buildings, the faint glow of lights behind curtains, the quiet that could either mean nothing or mean everything, depending on how it was read. The second officer glanced at him, noticing the change without needing it explained. "You want to go in?" he asked. Ryan nodded once, but he did not reach for the door immediately. "We will start with a knock," he said. The words were simple, but they carried a shift in how the moment would unfold. He stepped out of the cruiser, the night air cooler here between buildings, the sound of his boots softer on the pavement as he approached the front of the small apartment complex. A single light above the entrance flickered slightly, casting uneven shadows across the door, and for a brief second, he paused, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness, the kind that measured before acting. He knocked once, firm but not aggressive, then stepped back half a pace, giving space, giving time. Inside, there was movement, the faint sound of footsteps approaching. Then the door opened slowly, revealing a woman in her mid-30s, her expression cautious but not hostile, her posture relaxed enough to show she had not been expecting trouble. "Evening," Ryan said, his tone calm, even, the edge gone, replaced with something steadier. "We received a call about noise. Just wanted to check in." The woman blinked, surprised, then shook her head slightly. "It is just the television," she said. "I can turn it down." Ryan nodded. "I appreciate that," he replied. No assumptions. No escalation. Just a moment handled for what it was. The door closed gently, and Ryan stepped back toward the cruiser, the interaction brief, uneventful, but different in a way that did not need to be announced. Back in her office, Maya finally lowered her gaze to the file, her eyes moving across the lines now, absorbing information, making decisions that would ripple outward in ways most people would never see. Her phone buzzed softly on the desk, a message from dispatch summarizing the night's activity, routine updates, nothing out of place, nothing that stood out. She read it once, then set the phone down, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the desk as she leaned back slightly in her chair. The room remained quiet, but not empty. The kind of quiet that held presence instead of absence. Miles away, Ryan settled back into the driver's seat, his partner closing the door beside him, the cruiser's interior lighting dimming as the doors sealed. "That was easy," the second officer said, a hint of relief in his voice. Ryan nodded, his hands resting on the wheel, his gaze forward. "Most things are," he replied, "if you let them be." The statement was not a lesson. It was not a conclusion. It was simply something he had realized. He put the cruiser into drive, the vehicle moving forward smoothly, merging back into the quiet flow of the street. And as the night continued, the calls would come, the lights would turn on again, and the choices would repeat themselves in different forms. But something had shifted, not just in one moment, not just in one interaction, but in the space between action and assumption, where everything that mattered actually began. The city had settled into a quieter rhythm by the time the clock pushed past 11 p.m., the streets no longer crowded but still alive in small, scattered movements, headlights passing like brief thoughts, storefronts dimming one by one, and inside the precinct, the energy shifted from constant motion to something more deliberate, more focused, where every decision carried a little more weight simply because fewer voices filled the space around it. Maya Henderson stood near the window again, the glass cool beneath her fingertips as she looked out over the grid of streets below, her reflection faint against the city lights, a silhouette layered over motion that never fully stopped. She did not stay there long. She turned back toward her desk, gathering a thin folder and a notepad, then stepped out into the hallway, her footsteps quiet but steady, the sound echoing just enough to announce presence without demanding attention. Down the corridor, a briefing room light remained on, a few officers seated inside, their voices low, reviewing reports, finishing paperwork, the routine that followed every shift. As Maya approached, the conversation softened, not out of fear, but respect, the natural adjustment that came when leadership entered a room. She paused at the doorway, observing for a second, taking in the details, the posture, the tone, the small signals that revealed more than words ever could. "Evening," she said, her voice calm, even. The officers straightened slightly, acknowledging her presence without breaking the rhythm of what they were doing. "Evening, Captain," one of them replied. She stepped inside, setting the folder lightly on the table, her gaze moving from one face to another, not searching for mistakes, not asserting control, just understanding the space she was stepping into. "Anything unusual tonight?" she asked. One of the officers shook his head. "No, ma'am. Mostly routine." Maya nodded once, her expression thoughtful but neutral. "Routine is where habits live," she said quietly. "Make sure the right ones are the ones you keep." The words were not sharp, not corrective, but they carried weight, settling into the room in a way that made everyone just a little more aware of how they approached the next moment. Miles away, Ryan Whitaker guided the cruiser through another stretch of downtown, the streets now quieter, the signals changing with fewer cars to hold back, the city revealing its slower, more reflective side. The radio came alive again, dispatch assigning a traffic stop just a few blocks ahead, a vehicle flagged for a minor violation, nothing urgent, nothing unusual. Ryan acknowledged the call, his voice steady, then slowed as he spotted the car in question, a dark sedan moving just slightly above the speed limit. Nothing dramatic, just enough to warrant a stop. His partner glanced over. "You want to light it up?" he asked. Ryan's hands rested on the wheel for a second longer than before, his eyes following the car, not just the movement, but the context, the surroundings, the way it fit into the flow of the street. Then he nodded once. "Yes," he said, calm, controlled. The lights came on, red and blue reflecting across the buildings, across the pavement, across the back of the sedan as it slowed and pulled over to the curb. The moment felt familiar, almost identical to the one from earlier, but inside Ryan, something had shifted just enough to change how it would unfold. He parked a few yards back, leaving space, letting the scene settle before stepping out. The engine idled, the lights flashed, and for a brief second, Everything aligned again in that same suspended tension. He stepped out of the cruiser, his boots hitting the pavement softly, his posture steady but not rigid, his mind clear in a way it had not been before. As he approached the driver's side window, he slowed slightly, not out of hesitation, but intention, giving himself a moment to see before speaking. The window rolled down, revealing a middle-aged man, hands resting calmly on the steering wheel, his expression neutral, waiting. Ryan leaned slightly, keeping his tone even. "Good evening," he said. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" The question came first this time, not the assumption, not the conclusion, just the question. The man shook his head. "No, officer." Ryan nodded once, glancing briefly at the speed reading on his device, then back at the driver. "You were going about 5 miles per hour over the limit," he said. "Nothing major, but I wanted to make sure everything was all right." The man let out a small breath, almost a laugh of relief. "I did not realize," he said. "I will slow it down." Ryan nodded again. "I appreciate that," he replied. No escalation, no tension, just a moment handled for what it was. Back at the precinct, Maya stepped out of the briefing room, the door closing softly behind her, her path leading her back down the hallway, past the quiet offices, past the reflections in the glass, back toward her own space. The night continued. The city moved, the calls came and went, but somewhere between a stop on a dark road and a question asked the right way, something had changed, not loudly, not visibly, but enough to shape everything that followed. The night moved deeper into itself, the kind of late hour where the city did not sleep but softened, its edges less sharp, its noise more distant, and inside the precinct, the steady hum of activity had settled into a quieter rhythm, where each sound carried just a little further, the click of a keyboard, the low murmur of a conversation, the soft closing of a door. Maya Henderson stepped back into her office, the light already on, casting a warm glow across the desk and the papers she had left behind, everything exactly where it should be, ordered, controlled, intentional. She closed the door behind her gently, the latch clicking into place with a quiet finality, then walked to her desk and picked up the file she had set down earlier, her fingers brushing across the edge before opening it again. This time, her eyes moved with purpose, scanning, processing, making decisions that would ripple outward, in ways most people would never trace back to this moment. But even as she worked, something of the night remained with her, not as distraction, not as weight, but as a quiet presence, a reminder of how easily a moment could shift depending on how it began. Miles away, Ryan Whitaker guided the cruiser onto a wider avenue, the streetlights spaced evenly, casting long, consistent pools of light across the pavement, the kind of road where everything seemed clear, visible, predictable. The earlier traffic stop had ended without incident, the driver continuing on, the moment dissolving back into routine, but Ryan did not let it disappear entirely. He carried it forward, not consciously holding on to it, but allowing it to shape the next decision before it was even made. The radio buzzed again, dispatch assigning another call, this time a welfare check, a report of someone sitting alone in a parked car for an extended period, not moving, not responding to anyone passing by. Ryan acknowledged the call, his voice steady, then slowed as they approached the location, a small parking lot beside a closed grocery store, the lights overhead flickering slightly, casting uneven shadows across the rows of empty spaces. He parked at a distance, not directly beside the vehicle, giving himself space to observe, to understand before acting. The second officer glanced at him, noticing the pattern now. "You want me to go around the other side?" he asked. Ryan shook his head slightly. "Let us start simple," he said. He stepped out of the cruiser, the night air cooler here, quieter, the absence of traffic making every sound more noticeable, the soft crunch of his boots on gravel, the faint hum of the streetlight above. He approached the parked car slowly, not creeping, not rushing, just moving with intention, his posture open, his hands visible, his presence steady but not imposing. As he reached the driver's side, he paused for a second, looking through the window before speaking, seeing not a threat, not a problem, but a person, a young woman sitting behind the wheel, her head slightly lowered, her hands resting loosely in her lap, her posture still. He knocked gently on the window, not sharp, not commanding, just enough to be heard. The woman looked up, startled at first, then confused, her eyes adjusting to the presence outside. Ryan offered a small nod, his expression calm. "Ma'am," he said through the glass, his voice steady. "Just checking in. Are you all right?" The words landed differently than they might have before, not as interrogation, not as assumption, but as a question that allowed space for an answer. The woman hesitated, then rolled the window down slightly, the sound of the glass sliding breaking the stillness. "I am fine," she said, though her voice carried a hint of something else, something uncertain. Ryan did not press immediately. He did not fill the space. He let the silence sit for a moment, giving her time. "You have been sitting here for a while," he said gently. "Just wanted to make sure you did not need anything." The woman exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. "I was just thinking," she said. Ryan nodded once, understanding without needing more explanation. "All right," he replied. "If you need anything, we are right here." No escalation. No conclusion. Just presence. Back in her office, Maya closed the file and set it aside, leaning back slightly in her chair, her eyes lifting toward the ceiling for a brief moment before returning forward. The building remained quiet, the night continuing its slow progression. But within that quiet, something had shifted, not just in one place, not just in one person, but in the space where decisions were made before they became actions. And somewhere out in the city, under steady streetlights and quiet skies, those decisions were already beginning to take shape in ways that no one would notice, but everyone would feel. The night had thinned into something quieter, the kind of hour where even the city seemed to breathe slower, and inside the precinct, the lights remained steady but softer in presence, illuminating desks that were now half empty, chairs pushed in, screens dimmed, the rhythm of work easing into its final stretch before morning would begin to pull everything forward again. Maya Henderson stood once more near the window, her reflection faint against the glass, layered over the distant glow of streetlights and moving headlights far below. And for a moment, she did not move, did not think in words, just allowed the stillness to settle into something clear and grounded. Behind her, the door to her office remained closed, the quiet inside uninterrupted, the kind of space where decisions could exist without noise, where clarity did not have to compete. She turned slowly, walking back toward her desk, her steps measured, the soft sound of her shoes against the floor the only movement in the room. She picked up her phone, glancing briefly at the latest updates, the routine entries, the standard reports. Nothing unusual, nothing that would ever make it beyond the system that recorded it. But she knew better. Not everything that mattered made it into a report. Some things existed only in the space between actions, in the way a moment was handled, in the difference between assumption and understanding. Miles away, Ryan Whitaker guided the cruiser out of the parking lot and back onto the main road. The engine steady, the headlights cutting through the quiet street ahead, and beside him, his partner sat without speaking. The earlier conversations now settled into something unspoken but understood. The radio remained quiet for a moment, then came alive again with another routine call. Nothing urgent, just another piece of the night unfolding. Ryan acknowledged it, his voice calm, his tone even, then adjusted his path accordingly, turning onto a side street where the buildings stood closer together, the light more contained, the shadows softer but more defined. As they drove, a car ahead slowed suddenly, pulling halfway to the curb before stopping completely, its hazard lights blinking in a steady rhythm that reflected off the nearby storefront windows. Ryan noticed it immediately, not as a problem, not as a threat, but as something to be understood before acted upon. He slowed the cruiser, maintaining distance, observing first, the pattern now instinctive rather than forced. "Let us check it out," he said quietly. He parked behind the vehicle, leaving space, the cruiser idling with a low hum, the flashing lights staying off, the scene controlled, calm. He stepped out, the night air cooler here, carrying the faint scent of the city, concrete and distant rain, and approached the car with the same measured pace, his posture open, his presence steady. As he reached the driver's side, he saw an older man behind the wheel, his hands resting loosely, his expression calm but slightly strained, like someone trying to solve a small problem that had not yet become a big one. Ryan tapped lightly on the window, not sharp, not demanding, just enough to signal presence. The man rolled the window down partway, looking up with a hint of relief. "Evening," Ryan said, his voice even. Everything all right? The man nodded, then gestured toward the dashboard. Car just stalled on me, he said. I was trying to pull over. Ryan nodded once, understanding. All right, he replied. Let us get you somewhere safe. No tension, no assumption, just assistance. He signaled to his partner, who stepped out and moved to help guide the car further to the curb, the moment unfolding smoothly, without urgency, without friction. Back in her office, Maya set her phone down and moved toward the door, opening it quietly and stepping back into the hallway, the building now even quieter than before, the late hours settling in fully. She walked past the empty desks, the dimmed screens, the quiet spaces where earlier voices had filled the air, and as she moved, there was no rush in her steps, no need to move faster than the moment required. At the end of the corridor, she paused briefly, looking out over the lower level of the precinct, the officers still on duty moving with a steady, practiced rhythm, each action part of a larger system that depended on choices made in small, often unseen moments. She did not call out. She did not interrupt. She simply observed, then turned and continued on, the quiet following her without resistance. Outside, the city continued its slow progression toward morning, the streets carrying fewer cars, the lights steady, the air cooler, and somewhere within that vast, moving landscape, the difference between how a moment began and how it ended had already shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to change what would come next, one decision at a time. The first hint of morning did not arrive with sunlight, but with a subtle change in the air, a quiet thinning of the night that softened the edges of the city and made everything feel just a little more visible. Even before the sky began to lighten, and inside the precinct, the steady hum of the building carried on, unchanged in sound but different in feeling, like a long breath finally nearing its release. Maya Henderson stood at the edge of the upper floor, her hand resting lightly against the railing as she looked down over the main area, the officers below moving through the final hours of their shift with a calm, practiced rhythm, each action small, on its own, but part of something larger that only made sense when seen together. She did not speak. She did not need to. The space held its own understanding. A report was filed. A call was answered. A conversation ended. And in each of those moments, something unseen guided how they unfolded. She turned slowly, walking back toward her office, the soft sound of her steps barely echoing now. The building settling into that quiet space between night and day where everything felt suspended for just a moment longer. Inside her office, the light remained steady, the desk organized, the file she had reviewed earlier now closed and set aside, its purpose complete for now. She picked up her jacket, draping it over her arm, then paused briefly, her gaze moving once more to the window, where the first faint line of gray had begun to stretch across the horizon, not yet bright, but enough to signal change. Miles away, Ryan Whitaker guided the cruiser down a long, empty stretch of road, the city around him quieter than it had been all night, the traffic nearly gone, the signals changing with no cars waiting beneath them. The earlier call with the stalled vehicle had ended without incident, the man safely on his way, the moment resolved not with urgency, but with patience. His partner sat beside him, one arm resting against the door, the other on his lap, both of them quiet, not because there was nothing to say, but because the night had already said enough. The radio remained still for once, no new calls breaking the silence, just the low hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of the tires against the pavement. Ryan's hands rested on the wheel, his grip relaxed, his posture steady, and as he approached an intersection, he slowed even though the light was green, not out of caution alone, but out of awareness, the habit now formed, the space between action and assumption no longer empty. He looked left, then right, then forward again. The intersection remained clear, the road open, and he continued through, the cruiser moving smoothly into the next block. It was a small thing, almost invisible, but it mattered. Back at the precinct, Maya stepped out of her office, the door closing softly behind her, and made her way down the corridor toward the exit, passing the few officers still on duty, each one acknowledging her presence with a nod, a quiet, "Good morning, Captain," their voices low but certain. She returned each acknowledgement with the same calm presence she had carried all night, not elevated, not distant, just steady. At the front desk, The officer on duty straightened slightly as she approached, his eyes meeting hers with quiet respect. "Heading out, Captain?" he asked. Maya nodded once. "For now," she replied. The doors opened again with that same soft sound, the early morning air meeting her as she stepped outside, cooler now, cleaner, carrying the faint scent of a city about to wake. She paused for just a second on the steps, looking out over the street, where the first few cars of the morning passed by, their headlights still on, their movement slow, deliberate, as if the world itself was easing into motion. She walked to her car, opened the door, and sat behind the wheel, her hands resting in the same place they had hours earlier. But the night between those moments had shifted something, not just in her, but in the space around her. She started the engine, the sound steady, familiar, and as she pulled away from the precinct, the city opened in front of her once more, the road stretching forward, ready to carry whatever came next. And somewhere out there, moving through the same streets under the same light, Ryan Whitaker continued his patrol, the night behind him, the morning ahead, and the space between who he had been and who he was becoming now defined not by a badge, not by a command, but by something quieter, something stronger, something he would carry into every stop, every question, every moment that followed. She did not change the system overnight. She did not need to. She changed one moment, one choice, one way of seeing, and that was enough to begin.